Today we've got the opportunity to interview Brian Solis, global thought leader in digital and new media and social media, well-renowned expert, prolific writer, and obviously published author, principal at the Altimeter Group, if I've pronounced that correctly, Brian, and all-around good guy, I guess. I consider you probably the Wayne Gretzky of digital because you skate to where the future is and you help us find that path. Very honoured and very appreciative to have you with us today.
It's my pleasure, and flattery will get you everywhere. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. See, Brian, I've just finished reading your book, What's the Future of Business. I found it a fascinating read, and I think, as I was sort of mentioning before, I found not only the content brilliant, but the design of it brilliant. I guess I wanted to know where you got the inspiration to write the book in that way, because it was something I'd never seen in any other book that I've picked up.
You know, first, thank you for noticing. Depending on how you count them, this is either my 6th or 7th book, and what I didn't want to do was just publish a book that looked like all of the others. I mean, if you look at all of the business books, they're usually rectangular. They're same type of paper and same type of font and layout and design. And I thought, you know, if the topic here is about not only what the future of business is going to look like, if the premise is about experiences and shared experiences and creating meaningful experiences, what could a book look like if it were an experience? And then I really started to think about walking the walk and talking the talk. And as an author, it would have been easy to just start writing and just let the publisher design it and produce it the way that a book has always looked, the way a book's always been delivered. You know, there's economies of scale around that design. But that's not what this is about, right? You know, the consumer's changing. You and I are changing. We use tablets and smartphones, and everything's digital these days, and social, mobile. We're part of a different lifestyle now, and as a result, why would I even invest in a book that was a book? So I was inspired by kids, you know, university, high school. You know, this is a generation that knows only digital first. They have to learn analog, right? We learn it the other way around. So if I was hoping to inspire them, there's no way I could do it by giving them a foreign object that they just couldn't relate to, just not even natural in terms of how they learn. So if I had to design the textbook of the future, what would it look like? And so I studied more UX, you know, design, studied how someone navigates the digital and both online and also the device. You know, what's different about how they read, what makes them share something, how do they scroll, pinch and zoom. So I reverse engineered a lot of that and put that into a print book to kind of see if you could make print matter again while still demonstrating the importance of the experience, still teaching you something, but putting in a lot of interesting nuances, like I learned that you maybe have about 6 minutes of focal time until you have to take a break, or your brain needs a little bit of an image or a graphic or something that just teaches you differently. So I didn't hold anything back. The book's still pretty dense, but it teaches you through text, it teaches you through imagery, I mean, it even has a navigation bar, and we got rid of the table of contents, you know, so that you can jump around anywhere in the book that you need to. You don't have to read it from left to right. It took me longer to study and design this than it did to write it, and I will tell you that it's a pretty big feat, because I even had to learn how to rewrite a sentence, you know, and that says a lot, right? Because now we're getting groomed into 140 character bursts, and you know, you write multiple sentences that are untweetable. Maybe you lost your audience. But in all seriousness, I was inspired by creating an experience and making print matter again, to see if I could teach myself something, and also show anyone who's reading it that, like, hey, I'm not just talking at you. I'm not professing to be some expert here that has a book and therefore you should learn from me, but instead, here's what I learned, and maybe we can do something together.
It's interesting. I mean, I think you absolutely nailed it. I think that the book's a wonderful read. I actually enjoyed reading every page of it. I found it to be an easy read but an intellectual read at the same time. And I got a lot of learnings out of it, and I just love the way it was designed and sort of put together. But I do want to touch on the learnings I got out of the book, because there were some fascinating things that you touched on. And I guess where I'd like to start is with the connected consumer and the new consumer, if you could call it that, Brian, and what that actually means and why it's important to understand, you know, the connected consumer and where we're heading in that space. And if you could elaborate sort of on that.
Well, you know, as an analyst, I study how businesses are using new technology, how they're affected by disruptive technology, and what they're doing about it. And I realized that they might, you know, reporting on what they're doing and then by default teaching other businesses to follow suit might not be the best thing to do. So I, over the years, started to become sort of this aspiring digital anthropologist to study behavior and to see if I couldn't bring those worlds together. What I had learned is that how businesses are evolving is not necessarily in alignment with how customer behavior is evolving. In fact, businesses are reacting to how technology and behavior is evolving rather than lead it. And that, to me, was an opportunity for, you know, what WTF, or What's the Future of Business, was all about. Along the way, I learned that a lot of us are getting caught up in millennials and Generation Z that follows. They're so different. It's affected everything from how we create products to how we market to them, how we, even inside the organization, how we employ them and cultivate them and reward them. Everything's different. And that's not a bad thing. We need to pay attention to how they're different. But I learned something along the way that was fascinating, and that was, if you study millennial behavior, but you also study how, say, you and I change from using social or using a tablet or using a smartphone, and as a result having information on demand, becoming more informed, becoming more empowered, becoming more connected, becoming more demanding, we start to exhibit millennial-like behaviors in all that we do. We start to exhibit millennial-like behaviors in how we make decisions, how we share, how we change the definition of privacy to suit our needs. It's fascinating. And so as a result, I realized that by focusing on millennials was just the tip of the iceberg, that businesses needed to look at those who live a digital lifestyle and how they all share similar behavioral attributes or characteristics, psychographics. That was what I call Generation C, Generation Connected, a group not bound by age, but instead bound by lifestyle. Okay. And that, to me, represented how we were going to look at the future of business, by a greater group of customers that were growing in size, while the traditional customers that you and I knew, that we grew up with, that we even, you know, probably defined over the years, was shrinking. And so it wasn't just about, you know, the younger generations. It was about this bigger movement that I found so incredible that I needed to study it. And by the way, businesses also need to study it because understanding who they are is going to allow them, I hope, to see, kind of like your Wayne Gretzky quote, is to skate to where the puck will be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's fascinating. And I think, you know, I think it really covers it, because more and more people are more connected every day. We have access to more information every day. We choose what we do with that information in very different ways. And I particularly liked, I guess, the diagram you drew from the zero moment of truth to the ultimate moment of truth. I think the thing that sort of jumped out at me, Brian, was not only capturing the customer when you ultimately grab them through that point, but what actually happens after that and how that can ultimately affect, I guess, the digital and social world in relation to your brand and that co-creation really of your brand, because you're not in control of it. It's connected with your consumers, your buyers, and even the people perhaps who aren't buying your product and service. And, you know, it's sort of, you know, I found it quite interesting, that whole cycle from beginning to end, and the number of different touch points, depending on industry, that people will assess before they make their decisions. Would you mind sort of going over that in a little bit more detail and better than I have?
No, it would be my pleasure. The zero moment of truth is something that Google really introduced to the world. I found it just powerful in its message, that the zero moment of truth is that moment when there's a spark of awareness and you're inspired to do something. Maybe that's, well, Google says in the Zero Moment of Truth, you're going to Google it. You learn more about it. But it's just curiosity phase or this discovery phase where you want to learn more. Maybe you're going to make a decision for or against it. Maybe you just want to learn more. Maybe, who knows, maybe you just want to become part of that ecosystem. But that Zero Moment of Truth is powerful. It just happens. It happens every day. But the thing about it is that, I don't know whether Google realized this or not, is that what happens in a world where you don't Google it, or you augment Googling with some other behavior, right? So maybe I'm going to ask my social network. Maybe I'm going to look at review sites. Maybe I'm going to look at apps that might reveal more concentrated information so I don't have to waste my time searching websites. What if I could just look at YouTube and find videos of other people who are sharing experiences or insights about that product or market or competitors? The difference is that when you Google it, businesses spend a lot of money to sort of outrank one another, right? But what happens in that Zero Moment of Truth is that you get a website, and websites, to be just frank, suck. Websites are written for the people who approve them. You know, they're designed by whomever you have on staff or whoever your agency is, you know, to design them. They're not necessarily influenced by the behavior of the people who hit them. And look, you know, how they were designed in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and how they need to be designed today, it's the difference between a click and this. You know, and it's a very different native experience, right? Now, what I find most important about this Zero Moment of Truth is that in the absence of finding relevant information through Google, anyone who's connected is very efficient in getting information the way they want it, on demand, and by people that they trust, right? So this is where the book focused on the ultimate moment of truth. The ultimate moment of truth was that bookend that said, when someone searches, what happens? And so what I had learned is that they're not just typing in product names or keywords like businesses are invested in. They're asking full-blown questions, right? So where are they asking them? What are the questions? And what happens? What's the answer? Who's sharing those? What are the links associated with that? And that ultimate moment of truth turned out to be shared experiences. People like them who either investigated, used, experienced, whatever it was, putting back into the ecosystem, investing back into this cloud of collective consciousness that was indexable, right? It's the new Google. It's this compilation of everything, but all based on human experiences. So when you plug into that, what came out of it often was not branded, created, really anything that businesses were spending a lot of money on. It was just human reactions, right? So in a world where the Zero Moment of Truth is met by the ultimate moment of truth, and it's becoming more integrated because of social, mobile, real-time, cloud, etc., businesses now need to invest in what's shared in the ultimate moment of truth to become the next person's Zero Moment of Truth. And that is profound. It changes everything about how we look at marketing, customer service, product development, because if you're investing in shared experiences, you design differently, you market differently, you write differently, right? Just like I had to write differently around this new book. To create an experience, you just take a different approach. It's almost design thinking as opposed to critical thinking. It's not following a product roadmap, it's inventing a new roadmap because you have a different type of outcome. So that's the relationship between ZMOT and UMOT. And for me, it fundamentally changes everything. And it really teaches you a lot about what I call the experience divide. What you say your brand is versus what someone says your brand is, right? You got to design for this, not this, because as you said, your brand is now co-created. It's not just created. And in a world where people are going to react and share just because they can influence that, you create a brand that you want, that you hope to have, but that means something to someone else.
It's fascinating, and I 100% agree, because even if I analyse my own behaviour online and the behaviour of my friends, I go to particular sources for information as opposed to once upon a time where I did used to Google it. I'm a lot more comprehensive in my search today, and a lot more comprehensive in sort of analysing the market and how that actually works and what that actually means to me. But I guess the question is, if that's the way the new consumer's acting and or behaving, and I think we both know that that ultimately is, how do we design for that? How do we think about that when we're coming up with our designs, when we're approaching these different platforms? How do we, I guess, tackle that challenge effectively, Brian?
So there's no magic recipe to this. It's difficult, right? I mean, it starts with the 2 Ps that I always felt were missing from the 4 Ps of marketing, something that's long debated. That is people, right? So who are you trying to reach? Who are they? You know, what are they looking for? What are their challenges? What are their aspirations? And then purpose. You know, what are you trying to do? You know, what's the relationship look like? What does it look like now, and what does it look like over time? Those are some really deep questions that the infrastructure of product development, marketing, decision making today just don't really appreciate. They're not really designed to explore them at any depth, right? So this is why you have creative. This is why you have big ideas. When you put out an agency brief, for example, you get you put out some parameters, you put out some business objectives and goals. You have some creative minds come together and just give you some brilliant stuff. But what if you could take a different approach to this, to say, look, this is what I want the brand to represent. This is why it matters to a connected consumer that's just has a different sense of value than maybe I had when I originally came up with the idea for the product or the company or the service or whatever it is. Maybe it's to feel inspired by a group of people that you might not have even known existed earlier, right? Because that's what this is about, is always trying to strive for relevance. And in this, I guess in the pursuit of relevance, inspiration is hopefully that essence, that quality that arises, that just changes your path, that splinters the direction that you were already on. At least it should. So that experience you want to design, well, it all emanates from this new type of work, asking different questions, thinking about where you could be versus where you are, thinking about, for example, I'm a big fan of design type of thinking. So if we have a vase here in front of us, you know, if I said, hey, I want you to design a new vase that holds flowers, you know, in a way that presents itself this way, you know, you're going to use a vase as your sort of home base, right? There's some comfort zone. This is the box that we're going to think inside of. If I tell you to think outside the box, you're still going to think about a vase. But what if I change the question, you know, or the instruction that was, you know, I've learned that the customer is really about sustainability or green or this or that, and if you had to design something that nourished or fed a flower or plants differently, that did this and that, you know, what could you come up with? And when you present it differently, you're going to come up with different ideas, right? They're going to be more relevant to the person you're designing for. They're going to be inspired by the people that you see differently than the person you saw yesterday, for example. The product is different, right? Just the intentions and the work that went into that is going to create something different. It's going to be meaningful because you cared, you tried to do something better. At least I hope you did. So that's kind of where it starts. It's just realizing, and this is why it's complex, is it's realizing that today, for the next 10 years, you have 2 distinct customer groups. You have the customer that you've always known. They're living longer, they're a little bit slower to adopt different things, they kind of go through life the way they always have, they're comfortable. You have this connected customer that just lives a digital lifestyle. Their phone is never a foot away from them. They're checking their phone every, I don't even know what, that's like every 6 minutes, whatever it is. The point is that until they converge, and until there's a rise of a different type of extreme behavior, you still have to market differently, right? They want to hear certain things, they need to hear certain things. It's an opportunity to reach the people you don't reach today. It's not It's not asking you to make a choice one or the other. And it's also saying, if you go about the way you're going about things today, you're really only going to cater to this group. But this group is shrinking. So you're essentially assigning yourself a lifespan, when in fact you can grow your market opportunity. You might be profitable today, great on you. But we're talking about where the puck is going. So skate to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's fascinating, and I think that is the reality. I guess the question I sort of have in my mind that leads to that, Brian, is you have some brands, engaged quite effectively on digital, and I think, I'd like to ask you about one of those brands at the end of this conversation. And then you have other brands who sort of look at digital and the social media and the platforms, etc., and they say, we're not sure if we should be there. We think we can control things better by not being there. And I guess I have a different view on that, but I'm more interested in your view, if brands, have greater control by not tackling this and looking at this now, and it's something that they should put to the back burner.
Brands who believe that they have control are, I don't know, they're just not in touch with reality. You don't have control. You might have thought you had control because you said something, you spent more money to talk louder than other people, you formed impressions because of the media you were able to buy, create, and distribute. But now media is democratized, right? People can say what they want on the platforms that they want. The barrier to entry is incredibly low. The barrier to audience building is really in the hands of those who are digitally savvy. More often than not, individuals are more influential digitally than a lot of the businesses or brands that think that they are today. That's a problem. Brands are co-created. People will share what they think. Over time, it collects into this repository that doesn't disappear. It's there, right? So in that zero moment of truth, when people are trying to figure out what to do or what to think, there's insight there for them, right? Now, it's called social proof. It's an old concept, and it is becoming more influential because it is, well, it's based on what people are publishing and sharing and exchanging. Now, brands can be part of that, and the more they understand what it is, how it's working, the experience people have versus the experience that they're trying to say they should have, right? The experience divide. By simply trying to understand it, they start to move on a path that closes that experience divide, right? Understanding what it is and investing in closing that gap is how brands can start to get control, right? Or at least start, well, yeah, I'm going to say that, to start to get control, because they're essentially and intentionally trying to steer the brand in a direction that, well, is desirable, right? It's a different standpoint. Now, whether or not brands need to be on social or mobile, it's a moot point. It's a conversation that, look, do you need a website? Do you need a phone number? Do you need an email address? Probably, if you want to do business today, you're probably going to need those things. That's how you use it, right? It's why you use it. And those are the things that separate the best, because the examples we see today are normally creative marketing, brilliant advertising, funny real-time spots. But what's the long-term play? And does your intention match the expectation and the behavior of those expectations in each of those channels? The answer right now is largely no, it doesn't. That's what I study for a living. How are brands using these technologies? Are they meeting the needs of expectations or the customer expectations? And are they evolving to be ahead of those expectations? No, because they're run out of silos within the organization. The social media group doesn't talk to the customer service group, that doesn't talk to the sales group, that doesn't talk to the advertising group, right? So things are just sort of chaotic. But if you design, or if you are designed to invest in experiences, to create an experience that you want people to feel and in turn share, then you realize that your job is not a marketer. Your job is not a social strategist or a mobile strategist or a digital strategist. You're a change agent. You're a revolutionary within the organization to bring these people together to solve for something bigger than you, to solve for something bigger than just any one of them. It's to create a business that's relevant to a different type of customer because you care, because you're interested in what's important to them, and just simply asking and answering questions makes you more relevant to everybody, right? Not just your connected customer, just makes you more relevant. I think those are the types of conversations we need to be having more of.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating perspective. I think that when you look at brands and you look at how they design social media from, I guess, the top down or the bottom up, depending on the organisation and whether they're on it or not, the things that are going on and the way brands are tackling this issue, some are doing, there's probably one or two that are doing an exceptional job of thinking about their end customer and the story they want the customer to be telling about their particular brand and designing with that in mind. And then there are others that are yet to sort of begin that journey. One of the things when I sort of look at this and I read your work and think about things, Brian, is with so much going on, so many different platforms and so much content out there, how does a brand get heard? How does a brand even raise its head effectively and get people to listen to it?
Well, there's what businesses are doing or what brands are doing, and maybe there's what brands should do differently. Right now they're just screaming louder or doing something out of the ordinary or being that much more different or raising the stakes to the point where you're really just competing for attention or you're competing for the moment. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you compete for the moment, you get caught up in competing for the moment. It becomes a benchmark, right? And the metrics that you attach around that moment start to trigger more moments like it or the pursuit of more moments like it. So then you start to get really involved in engagement metrics like views and click-throughs and comments and shares, and that's good, but what's the ultimate metric, right? Is it to embrace someone, to build a relationship, to instill the experience you want or the brand that you want someone to feel or talk about or share? I think that the answer to your question is to maybe just press pause, step back, and really think about this at a deeper level. Like, I'm not just competing for the moment. That's what everybody's doing. I'm competing for the future. And what's the future look like? And then how do I get there? And that takes vision, right? And that takes leadership. If you compete for the moment, you're just adapting the boundaries around you or the processes around you or the standards around you to just change your management infrastructure, right? How do you manage things to help you do that? But you're not really leading, right? And I think that what's happening now, this is an opportunity for leaders to arise, right? Not just manage your way to the future, but lead your way to the future. Let other people follow. Let other people try to figure out what you did or the best practices that you did that you formed so that they can try to emulate what you did. But it always starts with a vision for where you want to go that's different than how everybody else is pursuing that. And that vision is what's going to make brands great in the future. And it's that lack of vision that's going to make brands either a commodity or complacent or part of just average or just gone, right? And that is what digital Darwinism is all about right now, because technology and society are evolving. You have a choice. Do you either evolve along with it, do you not, or do you get ahead of it? And that is what I think should inspire marketers to not just be marketers, but be strategists. That should inspire customer service professionals not to just solve problems, but fix them before they even happen, right? And that's going to take a collaborative team of people to get together and say, look, we have a management culture today that is rewarded based on policies, based on procedures, based on legacy systems that were designed for the business of past. And that's just not going to cut it anymore. So as this group or as an individual, we must rise up and change the business from the inside out. Look, business is not the sexiest subject in the world, right? Change management is not the sexiest subject in the world. But defining a future that matters, whether it's for business or government or education or whatever it is, the world could use visionaries right now. and people who are passionate about making things matter again. And if they matter for people because it's the right thing to do, or because it helps us do something better than we did it yesterday, then what's wrong with that, right? Because I think the problem that businesses, or let's just say the rut that businesses got in, is that they just started to talk louder, spend more money, do things faster, but they didn't really change anything in the process. And we celebrate mediocrity when we think it's greatness. And that's why certain individuals like Steve Jobs or Richard Branson or whomever just stand out amongst the fray, because they actually challenge convention. They actually do think differently. And yeah, there's a lot of risk involved with just stepping out of that box, with doing something new, right? Because the minute you do, you're vulnerable. But I'm tired of people celebrating mediocrity. We're not getting anywhere fast. If we want to change the direction of the future, then we do need to just step out of the line of lemmings and really be inspired by what we think or what we believe is different, in order to come back in and just give people something to believe in. And that's what this is about.
No, I think that's excellent. It's funny, I only saw Steve Jobs sort of make that comment recently when he launched the iPod about the transfer of emotion. That once we have their emotion, we're connected to them, essentially, our consumers. And I think that's what matters in the future. I think connecting and really caring about your client base and adding value to their lives and mattering and delivering a purpose, you know, it matters. I think it matters to your future. I think it's, you know, starting with the vision, as you say, and driving towards it and say, what do I want to mean to my client base, and how does that matter? I think it's a fascinating subject, and I think that, you know, brands sort of tackling this and looking at this really need to think the way you're talking, you know, about collecting everyone together, having a culture that's focused on this. Because I think the stories that I've seen, Brian, and I'd love your observation on this, the stories that are shared and the stories that matter, they don't always come from the big brands. In fact, there's a lot of surprising stories out there that they start off very small, but because they've got a story that matters and a culture that matters and a purpose that matters, they cut through the noise very effectively. Is that what you see at times, Brian, when you're sort of analysing the market and looking at things, that what is shareable is something that matters?
I think the answer really just starts with a powerful word, a word that I think just never makes its way into the conference rooms of most organizations today, and that word is empathy, right? So what is someone's challenge? What are the hindrances around someone trying to accomplish something? What are the quirks, you know, associated with how somebody goes about a process? You know, Steve Jobs and the iPod, you know, they didn't invent the MP3 player, right? But they did notice that MP3s were a very difficult medium to master for the regular consumer. And so they made it easier. They made it elegant. They created a back-end system to manage all this stuff that could go across devices. They made an ecosystem around music that I thought was brilliant. Not just between how people used the music that they had, but also between the artists who were creating music who also wanted to reach consumers. So it brought together a world and made a new business model in the process, while still allowing you to leave behind the old devices that you had, and in turn, not just have an iPod, but then an iPhone, and then anything that iTunes ran, and then whatever, you know, you could use that for any product that Apple created, really. And it's just a complete ecosystem. But it was always about the story. Steve Jobs was a master storyteller, but not just because he could bullshit you. It's because he actually saw what it would take to build this platform, this ecosystem of which a story could unfold. That's what vision's about, right? If you can't articulate that vision, then maybe the vision isn't solid or baked enough, right? And so stories to me are the best stories are those that are really inspired by a different future, an alternate reality, about a solution, not just a feature, about something that just changes how you go about life or work, or just fundamentally shattering convention, or shattering the way that you thought things had to be done, because you never stopped and said, why do we do things this way? Yet you felt a lot of times, and you probably feel every day, this is horrible. Why do we have to do it this way? Because that's the way it is. Oh, okay. And you just suck it up and you go through it. But it doesn't have to be like that. And what's happening right now is that everything's going to get just completely Control-Alt-Deleted. Everything's going to be reinvented, and that's a great thing. The stories that happen are going to happen because the vision that went into challenging convention or making things better, the story is the byproduct of that, right? Don't start with the story. Start with vision. Make the story happen as a result. I think we had to raise the bar, because the story without the vision is just marketing, and it's okay. It's worked for a while, but I'm not going to buy it anymore.
Yeah, no, listen, it's an interesting pickup, and I guess, in sort of rethinking my question, it's kind of what I meant. When I see, Warby Parker's, I think it is eyewear with a purpose, right? That's when I sort of think about the vision, and I sort of, think about the story, but it's not the story as you say. It really is the vision. It's the vision of Tom's, and the vision they had around their shoes. And that's what connects with me. I don't know about, other consumers obviously, but, when I see that, it has a deeper connection. So thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate the opportunity to interview Brian. If people want to find out more about you, and I personally would encourage every CEO and every chairman to read Brian's book, What's the Future of Business? I think you'll learn a lot from it. It's an amazing read, but if people want to find out more about you, Brian, where do they go and how do they find out about you?
Well, thank you, and this was a really invigorating conversation, and I'm charged up. Yeah, I just ask that you go to briansolis.com. That's where you could find everything, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the URL for the book. But it's a good place to start, and I hope that people do take a moment to just take a look. I don't profess to be a guru or an industry expert. I'm just a guy who really feels empowered by these times, and I'm going out of my way to understand it, and I'm going out of my way to understand why certain things are happening, and why people are really pushing in new directions. And I bring back that insight to people and leave it to them. What do you want to do with it? And you can find all of that at my website. But look, this book is not the last book I'll write, and it's because things are changing, and this is a journey, and there's no end in sight. And the more we strive to compete for relevance, the more we become relevant. So thank you.